best part about podcasts is that they are free. Like a community library or a best friend's record collection, there is a seemingly endless amount of media available for everyone. Podcasting transcends boundaries, ultimately allowing subscribers to learn about a wide variety of information through practically any genre of their choosing. Although podcasts are sorted into specific genres, they offer a platform free of rules where the writers, producers, and hosts can discuss what they think is of interest to their audience. They are essentially a form of free-range radio that can take many forms: fiction, nonfiction, miniseries, weekly episodes, etc. Investigate pressing questions, highlight human interest stories, and even offer a platform for telling jokes and stories. Ear Hustle is a podcast that details the day-to-day life for inmates at California's San Quentin prison. It discusses the challenges of living in the prison system, the relationships that the inmates form, and the stories of how many ended up becoming incarcerated. However, what makes Ear Hustle interesting is that it is hosted and produced by two of the inmates at San Quentin, Earlonne Woods and Antoine Williams, along with volunteer artist Nigel Poor, whose idea was to start the podcast, navigate the American prison system in compelling fashion, allowing for a unique view into Earlonne and Antoine's world. This particular podcast is a terrific example of what one can achieve in a community environment. It resembles a kind of do-it-yourself aesthetic built from the ground up by the very people who are at the center of the topics being discussed. Whether a school, library, community center, or even a prison, a wide variety of environments could benefit from a podcast space. This is a concept that is certainly achievable for students, and a space that provides the opportunity to experiment from the ground up, similarly to Ear Hustle, could be beneficial in a high school, both now and in the long run. Similar to that of a community radio station, we envision our space as a room in a school where students can experiment with the technology and their friends. It would be a spot to create content for fun and for class. Podcasting doesn't have to be exclusively for classwork. Students and teachers could collaborate on personal or class projects and learn recording techniques in the process outside of class. Lurcher et al. Argue that libraries and learning commons are the ideal place for such a space. They write that making has always been a part of any vibrant library program. It is just now blossoming into a major movement, utilizing much more technology, tools, and advanced resources in a variety of ways like never before. We will detail the learning structure we envision a little bit later on in the paper. However, we are certain that a podcasting makerspace would encourage student inquiry in various forms, while also promoting the development of a technical and transferable skill set. Makerspaces are instrumental in developing media literacy skills and content knowledge among students. A makerspace provides a hands-on, creative way to encourage students to design, experiment, build, and invent. A makerspace is not solely a science lab, wood shop, computer lab, or art room, but it may contain elements found in all of these familiar spaces. Therefore, it must be designed to accommodate a wide range of activities, tools, and materials. A podcasting makerspace would cover many of these requirements, as well as incorporate connected learning strategies into an educational environment thanks to the flexible nature of podcasts. We believe that they are a form of media that includes the major learning principles and design principles suggested in the Ito et al. Report on connected learning, including concepts such as production-centered, interest-powered, peer-supported, shared purpose, academically oriented, and perhaps most importantly, openly networked. Podcasts may be the most effective medium for learning due to this final characteristic. The authors define openly networked as online platforms and digital tools can make learning resources abundant, accessible, and visible across all learner settings. As we stated earlier, podcasts are free, easily accessible through a variety of media, and cover a wide range of topics. There's essentially something for everyone, and podcasts are not necessarily expensive to produce.
Podcasting can be a very useful tool in integrating digital learning in the classroom, and the equipment costs are relatively low compared with the other modes of digital learning. While it's realistic to assume that many classrooms will be adopting the Finland model within 5 years, with students being supplied with tablets, the podcast approach doesn't require the same costs, and in the context of learning can be very beneficial across many subject disciplines. Podcasting requires two essential items: the microphone and the recording device, and optional items such as stands, windscreens, and pop filters, microphone protection, video equipment, extra memory card, and headphones. Podcasts are also an efficient alternative to traditional textbooks, which could reduce costs for many college and university students. In fact, student reception has been overwhelmingly positive, with a 2008 study that used observation to describe a study of the effectiveness of mobile learning in the form of podcasting in a business course for university students, with students finding podcasts to be preferable to their textbook as a learning aid. Podcasts are also mobile media. They're not limited to a room, but can be pursued outside of the walls of the podcasting space. Arrett and Hollett in 2013 refer to this concept as wayfaring. Wayfaring involves the shift of focus from device to person, suggesting a broader view that accounts for learners moving freely in both physical and digital environments. Furthermore, the authors characterize the wayfarer as someone who is continually on the move. Wayfarers are their movement. Mobility, in this instance, is not a matter of moving from destination to destination. Rather, mobility is the very experience of movement, of the path traveled, and this path cannot be predicted in advance. It is felt, sensed, and lived differently as wayfarers inhabit the path along which they move. Using this definition, we propose that podcasting could allow students to be able to roam around the school in order to answer questions and involve their peers who may not be initially interested in podcasting as a form of digital media, much like how Irlone and Antoine are able to explore their prison community. One thing that's really great about podcasting and ESL is that we can cover so many different strands of language learning with it. The obvious application of podcasts is to use them for listening comprehension, but students love producing their own podcasts as well, which allows them to create their own content based on their personal interests. Creating scripts and interview questions requires them to practice their writing skills and language focus, and the recording phase provides students with an opportunity for oral production and fluency development. After each episode is produced, students can not only listen to each other's podcasts, but also assess fluency and accuracy. Then, students can learn from their successes and mistakes, incorporating these lessons into new projects to improve the quality of their performance over time. Throughout the entire project, students rely on their communicative English skills to work collaboratively as they learn how to master the technology, solve problems, and come to a consensus about project decisions and goals.
So now we're going to look at how we can use podcasting at school in Quebec in an ESL context. So the first thing that we need to keep in mind in relation with implementing such an educational tool in the school context in this province is the Quebec Education Program, or QEP, in relation to ESL education. So let's look at the different components of the QEP and how to apply them to podcasting. So first, let's look at the aims of the QEP. There's three of them, which are construction of identity, worldview, and empowerment. So, construction of identity and worldview. That can easily be done during a podcast when the students are interacting with one another, sharing their views on different topics. Furthermore, researching, producing content, and reflecting on it can also lead to the construction of identity and worldview. Then, for empowerment, a podcast can permit them to develop skills, communicate, listen, and respond, and also reflect on a variety of topics in the target language, which is English. It also helps them build confidence to explain themselves and their opinions. Another important feature of the QEP are the broad areas of learning. They relate with the important issues of contemporary life. The goal is to use language to discuss these issues, such as health and well-being, career planning, citizenship and community life, media literacy, environmental awareness, and consumer rights and responsibilities. Once again, it's easy to see how podcasting, due to its nature, can be a useful tool in addressing these elements. As a matter of fact, those broad areas of learning could function as main themes used throughout the semester, year, or cycles. Students could pick one of them to draw upon when choosing a topic for the podcast that they need to produce. For example, by creating a podcast about healthy life habits, environmental issues that concern them, or an issue in their own community. Then, another important feature of the QEP are the cross-curricular competencies. Those are a focal point in all subjects and school activities. Here's a few of them. Uses creativity, solves problem, cooperates with others, uses information and communication technologies, just to name a few. So it is pretty evident how these cross-curricular competencies can relate to podcasting and be useful. First of all, like for solving problems. That could be a technical issue, how to research and present a complex topic, then cooperating with others. That could be, well, working in team, reaching an agreement on presenting a situation or a topic, the roles each other play during a podcast, etc. Then, using information and communication technologies. So that would relate to how to record a podcast, get the sound levels right, special effects, using a microphone, and so on. Then, there's also the subject-specific competencies in ESL. Let's see how they could relate to podcasting. So there are 3 specific competencies that the student needs to develop throughout elementary and high school. It is important to know that all of these work in synergy with one another, but also with the other elements presented earlier. So the first one is interacts orally in English. This is a cornerstone of the ESL program. It plays a central role in developing communication, competence, and confidence, which leads to empowerment, which is one of the aims of the QEP. So using podcasting, it is really easy to develop this competence. Students need to communicate their thoughts in English, but also listen and interact with their classmates during the podcast. Furthermore, they need to communicate in English with their teammates during the different production steps, giving them an opportunity to use English in a cooperative manner in a work environment, which is close to what they'll encounter in real life. So the second competency is to reinvest understanding of text. This means the students will use and integrate newly acquired knowledge from different sources, such as newscasts, newspapers, websites, and magazines. This is something they will do during a podcast activity when researching a subject, and then use the information to produce content of their own. This also relates to aims of the QEP, such as construction of worldview, but also broader areas of learning, such as media literacy and citizenship and community life. So, the third and final competency is to write and produce text. It is important to note that text here refers not only to written content, it can also be a video, a song, and of course, in our case, a podcast. This competency permits the students to develop an authentic purpose for writing and producing a text, as well as presenting it to a real audience, which in this case could be their classmates, but also other people if they put their podcast online, for example. Creating a podcast in relation to this competency also draws upon media literacy, of course. It permits them to become better informed, critical consumers of news, information, and culture, as stated by the QEP. Then, of course, using a podcast permits them to express their viewpoints and a message while using media and technology. Furthermore, we can see that the cross-curricular competencies such as using creativity, solving a problem, cooperating with others are also present in producing a podcast in relation to this third competency.
Proficiency in a foreign language is a skill which requires grammar, speaking, listening, and vocabulary. The traditional approach focuses on repetition, memorization, and the grammatical constructs of language and technology in the ESL classroom can have a lasting impact on acquisition. The practice of listening to native speakers in English can be helpful for English language learners for vocabulary practice, idiomatic expressions, and phrasal verbs. Teachers can encourage students to select podcasts based on their proficiency level for ESL, specific podcasts, and direct students to authentic podcasts once they have become advanced. In Montreal, all students in the French public school are required to learn English and pass the standardized English exam. A majority of the ESL instructors in the French milieu are non-native English speakers, and there tends to be a lack of interest and engagement with regard to the curriculum. Podcasting can be an effective tool in improving language skills, specifically oral comprehension, and to allow students to create their own learning space that can result in student engagement. Not only can podcasts provide extra listening practice for students, but teachers can also produce podcasts for their students. The equipment used for podcasts is affordable and easily accessible through websites such as www.podomatic.com. These are completely free for students and teachers to create a podcast page. Examples of ELT can include podcasts based on comprehensive activities, interviews, and vocabulary, idiomatic expressions with their usages, conversations between native speakers, vocabulary with their pronunciation, and story-based podcasting followed by listening comprehension questions. One of the examples of podcasting in the ESL classroom that was particularly effective was the podcast project at Dallaire Community College. This project involved a 7-month digital literacy intervention and explored different approaches to meeting the needs of all ELL students in the 6th and 7th grade classes. As opposed to the general curriculum, which emphasized writing competency, the curriculum incorporated spoken word, sound, art, and music in the form of podcasts. By introducing digital learning in the form of podcasts, they were interested in determining how this could transform the ELL or ESL classroom. The research team focused on 3 aspects of this process. The first was the podcast production, where students had the freedom to select material from a wide range of cultural sources. The second component was the creation of what is called third spaces, in which students work collaboratively and autonomously with digital play. The third component focused on student engagement with the traditional literacy approach compared to the collaborative multimodal model. During the production phase of podcasting, the students sampled audio using GarageBand and created stories drawn from written narrative, audio recording, illustrations, music, photos, play-by-plays, and font colors and styles. The third space functions as sites for students to come together as a classroom community through collaborative digital play drawing on the semiotic resources. The focus of the ESL classroom is centered around improving literacy and collaborative play using digital learning tools can provide a healthy balance within the ESL classroom. We find that the traditional approach to learning syntax, phonetics, vocabulary, and reading comprehension is still helpful with regard to the respective material that is covered in class. However, digital media in the form of podcasting can transcend the traditional approach and make the ESL and ELL classrooms relevant and transformative. While reading comprehension of English is important for English language learners in the context of the ESL classroom, in Montreal the speaking component is equally critical to English competency. Podcasting can be effective in allowing students to explore a multitude of resources by providing an alternative route for language exploration. Podcasting is also an effective tool for the teacher, and similarly to flipped instruction, podcasting should involve the teacher modeling how to create a podcast in order for the students to grasp the technical aspects.